I have this hour and a half. Filling facilities.
Are you giving a talk?
A little different.
So I was just not going to look at you know, with
So they don't know that I'll just bring us back.
I know that. Yeah. So it's like actually figure out how to get us like I always like but anyways, because I'm not the other we didn't do the whole thing, but we did Josh has it right now. I think that's how we ended up showing that like this is like a real vlog. Yeah. So we heard it. Yeah, no, I have like things that Josh is like that. That would be amazing. I think we would definitely find all of these options and I think usually, and I think those things that we should, and I'm trying to understand my region. and not feel like today I don't feel bad after. That's why like it's but I've also like how much
Check, 1, 2.
These are new friends I got data from Northern Center using wax. Just the way she's like taken actually integrated feedback mechanism. She's either like a PhD student that's like done or like but like that's just really cool. I know that has like she's now like, and I didn't so it's like stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Should be on. Okay. I assume I'm being heard in the back row. Yes, great. So good afternoon and welcome. I have the honor of opening Northwestern's Ninth Annual Symposium on this year's topic, Water in Israel, the Middle East and Africa, the value of experiential data for advancing water security. This symposium is co-sponsored by the Northwestern Center for Water Research, the Institute for Policy Research, and IIP. The co-organizers are Sarah Young, who will moderate this session, and I'll introduce in a minute, and Professor Aaron Packman. I'm Eli Reches, and I am the director of IIP. In case you want to know what IIP is, it's the Israel Innovation Project of Northwestern, which works to advance Northwestern technological and scientific partnerships with Israeli institutions of higher learning. Now, before I add a few words of substance about the nature of this symposium, I would like to thank the administrative staff, without whom this event wouldn't have taken place. Crystal Felcaro-Hips, who fortunately is not with us here. I mean, she's around, but English is not my mother tongue. She's on maternity leave. She gave birth a week or 7 days ago. She knew when to go on maternity leave. So Crystal Sawyer Bohannon, where are you, Sawyer? Yes. Lauren Johnson over there, and Vanessa Blythe over there. Yes, they definitely deserve it. So this symposium has already become a tradition in Northwestern interest and engagement in water issues, ranging from vast research efforts, and some of the leading figures are amongst us here, to teaching classes and organizing student tracks overseas. Thus, for example, 2 years ago, the 7th symposium dealt with, I quote, transboundary disputes and collaborative solutions in the Middle East. This was done in collaboration with a Turkish university in Istanbul. Last year, the topic was water innovation for wet and dry lands between the Great Lakes and the Middle East. So we are continuing this tradition for the 9th year, this year broadening our focus for the first time, adding Africa to our areas of interest and study. To quote Eric Perrault, who is the Northwestern Vice President for Research, who might show up later, we don't know yet, but just in case, I quote from his words, water is a growing priority at this university. I quote his writings, "We are blessed to be on the banks of Lake Michigan, to have researchers who care deeply about many aspects of water, and to have students," and I see some of them here, "who are thirsty for this kind of cross-disciplinary learning." There's a lot to be said and studied about transboundary issues in Africa. Just to mention one, and those who took the class that Aaron and I were teaching on water in the Middle East, see the continuous conflict between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia over water usage of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD. There's a rich history of exchange between the Middle East and Africa, including when it comes to water. Over the years, Israel, for example, has been active in providing water solutions to many African states. Water scarcity is an imposing threat on both the Middle East and Africa. The photo on the flyer, which you all have, was taken in Tigray, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, Ethiopia, in 2019, and is encapsulating the dramatic surge for water both in Africa and the Middle East. An additional goal of this symposium is to look at transboundary water issues, not only in Africa, but also in the Middle East. We hope to be discussing water issues pertaining to Israel, Jordan, the Palestinians, and more of the regional context of the Middle East. Now, dialogue is, as Sarah, I'm quoting Sarah now, is one of the most important steps towards conflict resolution. And it is an honor for us to have such a distinguished group of scholars who came from all around the world to attend this symposium. And with your permission, I would like to recognize our distinguished guests. And pardon me if I don't pronounce the name precisely as they are. So I go by alphabetical order, not to make any mistake. Christina Barstow. Hi, Christina, from Helvetas NGO in the US. Galan Johnston from Uganda, who is the principal, this is a difficult word for me to pronounce, statistician. Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Richard Kanjobo. Oh, I'm sorry. Richard couldn't make it from Malawi. David Katz from Israel, Haifa University. Elizabeth Mattioli from Kenya, the African Union. The African Union is represented in this conference, well so. Scott Miller, Charity NGO. Dana Pusti, where's Dana? Hi, Dana. From Tel Aviv University and presently visiting at the University of Colorado. Ismail Shahi, yes, hi, sir. Kenya, Office of the President, and AU, African Union. Alon Tal, Tel Aviv University, and visiting at Stanford this year. And last but not least, Michael Suita. I hope to pronounce did I pronounce the name correctly? Thank you, sir. Kenya, Minister of Irrigation. Great honor. Long last, I get to the most important part of my speech, and this is introducing the moderator. So I have 3 pages, and I just got a WhatsApp a while ago saying, Eli, reduce it to 1 minute. Impossible, Sarah. Sarah Young, professor for anthropology and the co-director of the Water Center. She's a Morton O. Shapiro faculty fellow at the Institute of Policy Research, and as I said, the co-director for the Center of Water Research. Professor Young's current research is focused on quantifying human experience with problems with water and unpacking their consequences for nutrition, health, and well-being. To that end, and now I come to the main thrust of her work, if I may assess that, she leads a large team in the development of water insecurity experience, acronymed WISE, W-I-S-E, scales, the first globally equivalent way of measuring water access and use. She has co-authored more than 170 peer-reviewed publications and been funded by many national, international agencies, and may I see local as well, local universities as well. So without further ado, I hand the mic to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think we should take a moment to appreciate our patriarch here, Professor Reckes, for being the mastermind behind 9 years of these symposia. So thank you. With Professor Aaron Packman. I am here to set the stage ever so briefly. There are far more interesting people in the room than me. But I'm here to get us kind of just on the same page for what the WISE scales are. Just brief overview and update. So what are the WISE scales? And if you sort of black out for the rest of my 10 minutes, 8 minutes up here, I'm going to tell you the answer so you can order your shoes online. The WISE scales are 12 questions that work universally. They capture universal experiences with problems with water. They take 3 minutes to ask, and they have worked everywhere we've tried to use them. So that's the WISE scales. But I think it's interesting to hear a little bit on the backstory of, you can read about the WISE scales in peer-reviewed papers, but the backstory is me as a baby assistant professor 12, 13 years ago with a large grant from the National Institutes of Health to study food insecurity in Western Kenya. And while I was there to study food security, and my PhD was in nutrition, so I really knew about nutrition. I'm also trained in anthropology, so I know enough to ask people what they really care about and not just project my agendas onto them. Talking to these women, and these women are telling me, we're having these problems with water. And I do speak Swahili. It's not great, but it's good enough for me to say, no, mama, I'm not asking about water, I'm asking about food. And they say, yes, but water, it's a thing. And so this photo here really encapsulates what I initially wasn't listening to, and eventually, if you say things to me enough, I will listen to them. So you can't quite tell. She's very pregnant. She's pregnant out here. She's 9 months pregnant, and she's going to fetch water. But if you're paying attention to the photo, you can see that there's water infrastructure right there. So why is she going to fetch water? She's going to fetch water because her mother-in-law, mother-in-laws, gotta love them, her mother-in-law is not letting her use that water. So she's obliged to walk far enough to go into premature labor of great harm to herself and to her infant. Eventually they were okay. But there are these, that made me learn water is a thing. Water is life. I've now heard that in many, many languages, but it was not on my radar. So remember, I'm a baby assistant professor 12, 13 years ago. And I think, okay, I have a beautiful study design. I have this $1 million from the National Institutes of Health. Let me just quickly measure water alongside the food measurements that were already well validated. And I went to the literature to see, like, with the help of some fantastic undergraduate students, to see how are people measuring water. And this is my quick primer on water security. So water security generally is used to mean many things, but there are kind of 4 hallmarks of water security. And the first is availability. Is there water out there somewhere? That's the first domain. The second is access. If there's water out there somewhere, can you get to it? So can you walk to it? Is there a pipe coming to you? Can you afford to pay your water bill? Can you access it? The third domain is if you can access it, can you use it? Is it water you would want to brush your teeth with? Is it water you would want to bathe with? So that's the third domain. And then the fourth is reliability or stability across time. Can you count on it? And so looking at how water was measured, hydrologists know how to calculate how many cubic meters are in Lake Victoria, for example. The Sustainable Development Goals track infrastructure to know if people are accessing water. There are lots of ways of looking at if water is safe or not. But that would not help me to see the problems of that woman you saw on the last slide. What I needed was something really holistic, like how is water showing up in this woman's life? Because going back to this picture, Lake Victoria is right there. I mean, it's not, she has enough water physically available out there. And she even has infrastructure. But there was this invisible issues that she was facing that weren't showing up with standard ways of measuring. And I'm gonna fully disclose to you, I was highly influenced by the food security literature. I mean, it's pretty much borrowing a page from the playbook of how we measure food security, which is every year, and this is an official Sustainable Development Goal indicator. Every year, we ask what people's experiences with food are. Are you skipping meals? Are you worried about food? It's these sorts of questions. And so, with necessity being the mother of invention, the WISE scales were born. So in 2018, and this is a collaboration with 30 different scholars from around the world, we collected data, tested out these questions in 28 sites, lots and lots of households, and we sort of landed on these magical 12 questions. A couple years later, Gallup reached out to me and said, we should do this, but for individuals. So we adapted the questions. The same concepts are being asked about. We're just asking at the level of the individual. And from there, we had data at that point from 31 countries. And I'm going to not bore you with the blood, sweat, tears, statistics, theory, gray hair that went into creating these scales, but all of this is available, open access for anyone to read who's having trouble going to sleep at night. So fast forwarding a few years now, these babies have been born and they're growing up. They have been used now in a lot of places by a lot of people, by some really small organizations and by some really big organizations. The government of Mexico, for example, has used these annually in their National Health and Nutrition Survey for the last 4 years. And I think this uptake is attributable to the fact that it works across levels. So we can use this at the country level to understand where there are needs, but we can also use it to understand the impact of World Bank building a big dam in Karnataka, India. And the other thing, and I feel like I'm overusing the term gateway drug. I have teenagers, I should be careful with gateway drugs. But water insecurity maybe is not interesting to people who care deeply about mental health. But now we can tie these water insecurity data to maternal depression. We can tie water insecurity to food security and dietary diversity, or opportunistic infections, people living with HIV. We can tie this to prosperity. So if I'm talking to an economist love you economists. Picking on economists is like, I know you really don't care about water, but you do care about prosperity, and let me make the case and draw these points together. So now you know what the Y scales are. I'm just going to give you the 4 distinguishing features of these, and I'm going to pass the mic. So the first is that these are precise. So now that we're measuring at the level of the individual, we've often been measuring at the level of like a basin, a catchment area, or even a household. But those of you who have faced problems with water can know that a woman's experience in a household can be very different from that of her partner. So because of this precision, earlier in 2024, they were recommended by WHO and UNICEF for global monitoring. They're also more holistic. So often we're talking about drinking water, and that's the Sustainable Development Goal language. But with the Y scales, we're capturing psychosocial dimensions like anger, or food preparation, or hygiene, so washing your hands or washing your body. The third, it's holistic, so we really can bring in, it's a big Y scale family because we can talk with nutritionists with this language. We can talk with engineers with this language. It's wonderful. And then lastly, we can use these data to compare across countries. So these questions are called non-invariant. That is a fancy statistical term to say, like, if it works in Malawi, and it works in China, and it works in Australia, and it will work in Russia. So we can compare water insecurity by region or by country or by town. So I'm just going to leave you to say that with the message that there's a lot on the horizon. Although now the scales are a couple of years old, they are still like only this tall in terms of like academic ideas. And we have a lot of data on the horizon. So I'll just leave you with the story of initial failure. The story's not over yet. But in 2024, the UN called for new indicators for tracking progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And the short version is I wrote to them and said, like, Dear UN, we have the Y scales and we have data for 40 countries. Isn't this great? Don't you want to use this as a new Sustainable Development Goal indicator? Look, we have these country profiles published. Look, it's so attuned with what you want to do, leaving no one behind. And they said, hey girl, hey, it's important, but there's uncertainty regarding data availability and global feasibility. Sad. I teared up, but I said, I'm not going to let mere data, lack of availability, stand between us as Northwestern, as a wise community, and the understanding how water is showing up in people's worlds. So as of this year, we partnered with Gallup, and we will have data for 40 more countries for a total of 80 countries. So all the countries in purple, we will have data for by the end of this year. And I will write another note to the UN, Dear UN, hey girl, hey, I think you should maybe consider this again. And there's every reason to think that with the momentum that we have, that this will be a thing. So I want to thank you all for being on this water security journey with you. And I want those of us who are in this room at Northwestern to know that this is not the last water-related event here. So we have started this amazing thing called watering holes. Get it? And they're really informal. So someone comes and speaks about something quite interesting for 15, maybe 20 minutes. The next one is on May 27th, and George will be speaking with Lena Harkness on some really cool work that they're doing. And lest you think we only care what faculty say, you are wrong, because we are really wanting to hear from students as well. This, my dears, is a clickable QR code. And on May 22nd, we will be having a student jamboree, which is a student version of what we had for faculty. But the student one's going to be more fun because this, first of all, there's really cool swag. TBD, to be revealed. And we will end at the sailing center with stand-up paddle boarding. There'll be the Juman. Sorry, Omar. Now here, maybe we'll let you come on. But it's going to be amazing. So please register here. We really want to hear your voice. We really want to know what you are interested as students at Northwestern to be part of the water community. So with that, I would like to turn the mic over to Dr. Scott Miller, who is with Charity Water. And I want to appreciate Scott, but also Charity Water for being early adopters of the WISE scales. Since we have been chatting, Scott, where are you? Oh, there you are. We've known each other 2 years, 3 years. I mean, Charity Water has gone from saying, oh, WISE is interesting, to announcing it as a key performance indicator to be used by all of the organizations from whom they are supporting. So it's a big honor for Charity Water to have had that faith in us, and I'm excited to hear what you're going to say today. Please welcome Scott Miller. Oh, sorry, Scott, 1 second. This is like...
Okay, hey everyone. Thank you, Sarah, so much for having me here. My name is Scott Miller, and I lead monitoring, evaluation, and learning at a nonprofit called Charity Water. And that is just fancy nonprofit speak for using data to help maximize the impact of every dollar that we spend. And so Charity Water is a nonprofit whose mission is to ensure that every person on the planet has that safe, reliable, adequate water that Sarah was talking about. And for more than 703 million people around the world, that's still not the case in 2025. So primarily concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. It's so excellent to see a focus on sub-Saharan Africa today, because like the photo you're seeing here, there are so many water scarce and water insecure parts of sub-Saharan Africa, primarily located in remote rural parts of some of the lowest income countries on the planet. And this is where, let me see how I click to this. Got it, that makes sense. There we go. So this is where Charity Water concentrates its work across 22 countries, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in Southern Asia. And we work through 55 local implementing nonprofit organizations. So we're really lucky today to have Dr. Christina Barstow here, who represents one of those organizations, Helvetas, that we work with in many countries. And today, going back to 2008, Charity Water has provided funding to nonprofits to build clean water infrastructure that serves more than 20 million people with reliable, clean drinking water across 29 countries, including a few countries that we're no longer actively working in. And we have raised more than $1 billion in current donations and future commitments for clean water access around the world. But all of that work is really only possible through those local partners. When you think about finding some of the most water insecure, some of the most food insecure communities on the planet, and trying to build infrastructure that will bring reliable, safe water to those communities for decades, that work has to be done in a really context-specific manner, especially if you want to do it in a cost-effective manner. So the way that you need to do this is really through people that understand the regions that they're working in. They have deep relationships with the community, but also with the regional government, with the local government, with the national government, to be able to get the proper approvals, to be able to make this happen. You need people that know the local geology and geography to be able to find where the aquifers are, where you can drill in, and how much water you can safely pull up without depleting that natural resource. You need to find engineers and chemists that can treat the water to make it safe to drink. So this is a large operation that really requires global expertise to be able to do. And when I talk about the context-specific nature of this, it really shows up when you think about the infrastructure that brings people access to clean water. So we all rely on some form of infrastructure to get access to our water. There is piped water running through this building right now. That water is pulled from a source, treated, stored in a tank, and distributed here. And the process for bringing people clean water around the world is really not that different, but you can get creative in really difficult and water scarce environments with how you do that. So I'll walk through a couple of examples of how our partners go about addressing water insecurity. The most common example that you often think of when you think of nonprofits investing in clean water infrastructure is you think of a well with a hand pump. This is really one of the most simple pieces of clean water technology where you're just drilling straight down below the ground into an aquifer and building a simple piece of equipment on top that lets you easily pull that water up to the surface. If that's protected and contained right, that water is usually safe to drink. You can also treat it in addition to that. We also, increasingly around the world, you're seeing the sector move toward piped water infrastructure, really similar to the kind that you would see around small towns in the US, where you pull water from a source, store it high up in a reservoir tank, and then use gravity to let that water run through piped networks out to communities that let people access clean water at these tap stands, often right outside their home on their property, or in many cases, you can even pipe that water directly into the home and give the kind of water access that's closer to what we know. In some places, you're doing something as simple as protecting a natural spring where there's clean, safe water and providing an access point. In some places, this is especially common in especially dry desert parts of India. You're able to invest in rainwater harvesting that will capture water in the monsoon season, store it, and treat it so that it's safe to drink year-round. And in other places like Cambodia, where water is abundant, it's all around on the surface, it's just not safe to drink, partners are able to build biosand filters that you can put incredibly dirty and unsafe water into the top, like you see on the top there, and out the other side comes safe drinking water that you can test for any number of parameters and is safe to drink. So when you see that kind of variety of work across 22 countries, different technologies, different local geologies, my job and the job of people that try to bring data into this perspective is how do you capture that work in one simple way? And the truth is, it's really, really difficult to be able to measure the impact of that work when it looks different in one context than it does in another. And so Charity Water to date has gotten quite good at doing this. We work with our implementing partners to go to a random sample of households in the area that they are going to work in, and they'll measure water access levels. They'll measure how long people are walking to collect water, where they're collecting water from. We'll test water sources to see if they're safe to drink. We'll get detailed data on people's sanitation levels, their hygiene situation, and how their water system is managed. But what that leads to is a database of 22 indicators. So you're looking at 22 different data points and trying to assess what's working well, what's not working well, how do we target our investment into having the most impact possible. And this kind of array of indicators is really where HYs and Ys entered the picture. So Sarah had been doing incredible work with her team, like she talked about, validating these scales, testing them in different environments. And when this got to a point where this is a well-validated tool, data from the Gallup World Poll in some 40 countries, really well-tested tools that we could simply build into our existing survey instruments, we realized that not only was overall water insecurity a concept that we wanted to be capturing better, we wanted to be bringing all of those dimensions that Sarah talked about into a simplistic indicator. But when you break these individual questions down, the components that you're asking people about are also really compelling things to know about. If you're one of those implementing partners, you probably do want to know whether people are worried about their water situation. You would want to know about that before you implement there. But you would especially want to know that after the infrastructure has been implemented, maybe 6 months, a year, 5 years down the road. You would want to know whether people are angry about their water situation, whether people are going to sleep thirsty. And if you're able to monitor that data over time, any changes can really act as something of an early warning system for knowing when a response might be needed, when infrastructure might have broken down, when people's water insecurity might be climbing back up in response to something changing on the ground. So that's what we were able to do, is we were able to adopt this, work with Sarah and her team, add this into our bank of indicators that we collect alongside our partners. And we've, over the last year and a half, been collecting this data around the world, both before our partners implement. They will go out to households around their implementing areas and collect the water insecurity experiences scales. They will implement that clean water infrastructure, and then they'll go back out a year later and recollect those surveys in the same communities to be able to measure how far they've moved the needle. And so you look at a study that Helvetas did in Bangladesh over the last year and a half or so, and they found that across the board, water insecurity was meaningfully dropping across each of the 12 components of water insecurity. We collected this also in Madagascar, where we see a very different level of baseline water insecurity, not quite the same level of severity that we're seeing in Bangladesh, but we're still across the board, across all 12 items, seeing that these scales are responsive to a change in the water environment in these communities. We also collected a few years ago data in Nepal. This is one of the first places that we piloted this, and will be out in publication hopefully very soon, where we were able to show the responsiveness even in a very mountainous environment with piped water systems that are perched along mountainous communities. And we were also, as an organization who has to go out every single year and raise all of the funding that we get, so all of the impact that we're able to have every year is based on our success in appealing to donors, in bringing people in making people care about clean water. We've found that this is a really compelling tool, not just for our implementers to be able to learn about what's working and try to adapt and respond to the experiences of people on the ground, but we've also found that being able to talk about water insecurity, being able to tell people stories of how water insecurity is reducing in response to their donations has been a really successful avenue for us. It's something that we're seeing a lot of success in, and we're going to continue experimenting with how we can incorporate water insecurity and WISE data into the way that we speak to donors, bring new donors in, and also report back on the effectiveness of people's donations. And then Sarah mentioned the Gallup World Poll data, just to emphasize that that work, even is completely separate from what Charity Water is collecting in specific site-specific interventions. Being able to look at water insecurity at a national level is incredibly helpful for us. We are often trying to decide where to work, where to invest. We've come up with a criteria for how we landed on these countries that we work in that's based on the current levels of water access, poverty rates, conflict, and long-term security. And we've landed on a set of countries that the Gallup World Poll data really confirms are water insecure. And then within those countries, now that we're collecting site-specific data, we have a reference point. We have a benchmark for what national water insecurity is in, say, Kenya, when our partner goes out and does a project-specific intervention in a part of that country. So thank you all so much. Very happy to be here. Very happy to answer questions.
So just to clarify on what the run of show is, we will have one more presentation, and then we'll move to a panel discussion during which you can ask questions to anyone. So it's been highs and lows of planning an international event like this include some of the difficulties that we experience with international travel. And it really is unfortunate that, oh, no. When, David Katz is definitely, I'm sorry, I've got Kajambo on my mind. It's extremely fortunate that Dr. David Katz landed ever so surprisingly after a night in Athens here in Evanston. We're so grateful for you to be here, and we would like to welcome Dr. David Katz.
I have to apologize, my slides are not nearly as aesthetically pleasing as the last two presentations. I'm just a pathetic little academic. Okay, so I have not used the HWISE or IWISE indicators, so I'm not going to be talking about that. I am going to be talking, not yet, I should say. I am going to be talking about a little bit of my experience looking at what's been called experiential data, and looking at how perceptions differ. And a lot of times officials will say, but that's subjective. And so it's not as valid. And because it's subjective, it's maybe more valid in many instances. And so I'll just give a brief overview of some of the work that I've done on this stuff. By the way, I want kudos for making everything in purple here, including my shirt, which I borrowed from a friend today. Okay. So I'll just talk about a whole bunch of different work I've done and how perceptions differ maybe from official statistics and why it's important. So most of it is from Israel, Palestine, Jordan stuff. So I'll start with looking at perceptions of water scarcity. So there's a very commonly used indicator of water scarcity at a national level called the Falkenmark Index. It's used by the UN and lots of others. And it's a broad rule of thumb. And like any aggregate statistic, it's going to miss out on the dispersion among within countries. You know, who's getting it and who's not. Exactly the sort of stuff that Sarah was talking about, and the need for more specific indicators. But it is a rule of thumb that's used quite often. And this is sort of cubic meters per capita annually, availability. Right? Doesn't say anything about if it's accessible or anything, but availability. And the rule of thumb is less than 1,700 is considered a country with water stress, less than 1,000 water scarcity, and less than 500 acute water scarcity or absolute water scarcity. Okay, so these are some numbers for the Middle East. And Israel, which sort of prides itself on being innovative and a leader in desalination and wastewater reuse and lots of other statistics, technology, sorry. If you look at it, and these numbers are from 2020, so they're already out of date because of high population growth in the region. But if you look at water availability, Israel, if you just look at its freshwater resources, is way below the standard for acute water scarcity. And if you add in all the desalination and wastewater reuse and blah, 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 you get to a figure that's still half of that, okay? So by objective standards, right, we're very water scarce, and yet you still have officials saying we're the leaders in dealing with scarcity and addressing scarcity. We've solved our problem. And I sent you an out-of-date version. I had updated this, but if you look at Jordan, they have even less, right? And again, the population growth means that these numbers are out of date. And if you look at Palestine, right, it's even much less. So why does this matter? Well, if you look, for instance, in international negotiations and hydrodiplomacy and all this work, which is a field that I work with a lot, you'll see that the different sides will emphasize different statistics, right, depending on what they feel is important. So almost any work that you've looked at, that you can look at on Arab-Israeli water sharing, the Israelis are emphasizing we're in a water scarce area, we need to grow the pie, right? Whereas the Arabs, especially the Palestinians, are saying, no, we need better distribution of the pie, okay? It's about not about the size, but the distribution, or it's about both, right? But each side will emphasize sort of the statistics that best suit their agenda. And of course, everybody can justify them. But it can be a real sticking point in international negotiations and achieving any kind of progress. Looking at water scarcity at a national level, some work that I did surveys already a decade ago, I did it during an extended multi-year drought. But it was after a period where we had just developed a lot of desalination, and the country was pretty proud of itself, and a lot of the government officials and water managers were bragging about how we've solved our water problems. This at a time when the Sea of Galilee, our only freshwater lake, was at record lows. Our aquifers were being drawn down. We didn't have a sustainable water use at all. Our rivers are all denuded. And yet, I did a survey, and 2/3 of people almost said we don't have water scarcity, right? So go ahead and try and convince them to conserve water now. after your policymakers have been saying for a few years, we've solved our water problems, we're experts in water, we have more water than we know what to do with, et cetera. And in part, they had to do that because they had to sort of justify the high costs of desalination. No, this is going to solve our water problems, right? So in the end, I presented this to the Israeli Water Authority, and I said, you have a real problem. And they eventually had a campaign a couple of years later when the drought continued for another 2 years, that had big signs saying, despite the desalination, Israel is still drying up. You still have to conserve water. It's also well known in the water economics literature that people don't have a clue how much they pay for water, unless it's really expensive, right? And then they do, or unless they have to buy it up front, and then they do. So most of us, right? We know how much a quart of milk costs, a gallon of milk, because we buy it before we get it. But for water, well, you know, we get a bill at the end of the month. We have no idea how much we've even consumed. We just pay the bill, right? And people don't know. And so I did a survey and asked people about trends in water prices in Israel. The prices had actually been cut for the last several years, but only 13% of the people knew that, right? Said that they'd gone down. The overwhelming percentage of people thought prices had been going up. Why? Because that's what prices do. They go up, right? There's always inflation. And so that has real implications, people's perceptions, if you're trying to use this as some kind of instrument to induce conservation or to give people a bonus. So the politicians were reducing the price of water to sort of score political points, but they weren't scoring any points because nobody knew it, right? So they were raising prices, and consumption was going up. Why? Because we have more water, because we have desalination, because you've been telling us we've solved our water. So the prices had no real impact. So there's a real disconnect between, you know, what was happening and what people were perceiving. This is just some work by a student of mine looking at fluoride, right? Adding fluoride to the water. It's common practice in the US. It's not common practice in most of the world, in fact. And not even in most of the OECD countries, the sort of rich countries. Israel stopped adding fluoride after a big public debate about a decade ago. We did a survey for a master's project. Almost nobody knew that. Everybody said that we're still adding fluoride. And the people who were for and against pointed to very, very different statistics on what was important to them, like what were their concerns, right? So the people who were for were saying, but it helps your teeth and cavities and everything. And the people who were against are saying, but you're drinking it in your blood supply and it's going into babies at higher levels than they need. And so it's very different sort of set of statistics that are important to people, right? And motivating people to be for or against. Did some work on water conservation and asking people to conserve water. And again, this was during a drought period, a heavy drought period. And I worked with a couple of people who were marketers. They weren't necessarily water people. And they said it's not about, you know, telling people to conserve. It's about how you tell them to conserve and what motivation you give them. So we sent out different messages. One that said you really have to, the country's drying up, it's really important to. And other ones that said it's really worthwhile, you're going to save money and it's good for the country and whatever, much more positive versus the hammer over the head. And we saw that, I don't know if you can see this, so this is the blue is the control, so what happened without. Both of them worked, but the positive message worked much better, right? So the it's worthwhile versus the sky is falling, you have to. Some work we did on stream restoration that I did with colleagues. We looked at also for the Jordan River and also for the Dead Sea. We wanted to see use a common measure that economists like to use, willingness to pay, as if this is some kind of indication of the importance that they place on things. And we saw that the Jordanians had a much lower willingness to pay for improving the Jordan River or the Dead Sea. But when we did follow-up questions, we found that actually it was much more important to them because it's really their only source of water that they have to go to for recreation and stuff. And that disconnect And we found it wasn't because it was less important, it was because they didn't feel like they should be the ones to pay. We didn't cause the problem, somebody else caused the problem. So, right, so just asking, using these statistics. And Alon Tal, who's going to be on a panel in a little bit, had a brilliant PhD student many years ago, Adam Abramson, I think was his name, who looked in Africa and saw that these willingness to pay figures, which economists love, are really off the mark, especially because they're constrained by ability to pay. But if you use other measures like willingness to volunteer, willingness to take a loan, which aren't constrained, you can see that people are willing to invest a lot more in these kind of indicators and how things are important. I won't talk about these other kind of things about stream restoration in Israel and what's really important to people in stream restoration, right? Is it the stream? Is it other activities by the stream? But really, we found diverse results. The last thing I'll talk to real briefly is looking at wastewater reuse. So this has been proposed as a real broad source of water, new source or existing source that's not untapped, that's untapped in most of the world. And we've seen that, especially in Arab and Islamic countries. I wrote here Arab, but I changed it and didn't send you the updated one to include other Islamic countries. In a lot of areas, Islamic people especially are debating whether it's even allowed by Islamic law to reuse wastewater. And so I have some master's students, Arab students, who are looking in different communities in which they live, trying to understand why some are adopting wastewater and reuse and some are not, even though they're facing the exact same incentive programs, right? So understanding people's perceptions, understanding the differences between sort of what the official figures are, what the theory, economic theory is, or other academic theories are, and what people are actually feeling and behaving is really, really important. One, because you want your policies to be effective. And they really run the risk of being ineffective if you don't understand people's motivations and how they're going to react. Right? The other thing is that you might miss out on potentially implementing policies that could be helpful because you didn't recognize there was even a problem. And so understanding the sort of perceptions and experiences that people have with water is not only sort of nice, it's really crucial to water management. And I'll finish with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Katz. So I'm going to move now to what I was about to say before I introduce Professor Katz, which is that we have had some sorrows with visas. There is really a wonderful person, Dr. Richard Jambo, who is from the Malawi National Statistics Office. He could not join us today. We also had some travel paper issues with Professor Grace Uwasanya, who is, in fact, she's here on the screen. So she is a professor at the United Nations University for the Institute for Water, Environment, and Health. And she is a remarkable person, so we will be inviting both her and Dr. Jambo back. But we're also lucky today that we have Ms. Elizabeth Montioli to present some of the remarks, just a subset of them, that Grace had prepared for us. So Elizabeth Montioli is joining us from Kenya, where she handles the climate and resilience portfolio of the Denmark-Kenya bilateral program. So let's please welcome Ms. Montioli. Who will be presenting on behalf. Do you speak microphone?
Oh, sorry.
A few words from Professor Grace.
Good evening, everyone. A pleasure to be with you here this evening, and also a pleasure to deliver on behalf of the distinguished Professor Grace her remarks, quite detailed, which is a testament of her passion on water security. Even though I haven't met her, I feel it from just reading her remarks. And I'll go straight into it and try to read as, verbatim as she has presented them. And here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, esteemed guests, it is an honor to address you today at this Ninth Annual Symposium on Water at the Northwestern University, where we gather to explore the value of experiential data for advancing water security in Africa and the Middle East. As a global researcher deeply engaged in water security, I am thrilled to share insights from my work, particularly the development of pioneering assessment of Africa's water security in 2022, and my plans to enhance it with water insecurity experiences, the WISE scales that Sarah has so ably taken us through. This symposium, with its focus on human-centric data, offers a vital platform to discuss how experiential data and insights can transform our approach to water security, informing policies, infrastructure, and transboundary solutions. So in 2022, I led the development of groundbreaking assessment of water security across 54 African countries, published by my university. This work, detailed in the report, Water Security for Africa, a Preliminary Assessment, introduced a novel framework with 10 key indicators to quantify water security. And these indicators, ranging from access to drinking water and sanitation to water governance and disaster risk, provided a quantitative baseline for understanding Africa's water challenges. The assessment revealed stark realities. And the reality was this: not a single African country, thank you, Professor Sarah, yes. not a single country, African country, had achieved a model or effective stage of water security. And we also found that Egypt led with a modest score of 70 out of 100, while Somalia, Chad, and Niger fall below 35. And I think we have, no, we don't have something on that. The results also exposed a critical barrier, and that is poor data availability, which hinders accurate tracking of progress towards the SDG number 6, which, as you know, is a global goal for clean water and sanitation. Now, the journey to these 10 indicators was a meticulous process, involving 5 distinct phases. And in the first phase, we drew inspiration from the Asia Water Development Outlook of 2016, which categorized water security into household, economic, urban, environmental, and resilience dimensions. This broad approach included indicators like access to piped water, diarrheal burden of disease, and it has an acronym there, and river health indices. However, its complexity and data demands were ill-suited for the continent of Africa, which is a data-scarce continent. The rest of the phases underwent a series of fine-tuning until we got to phase 5, where we crystallized 10 components, and I think we have those here. Yeah, here they are, where we crystallized 10 components. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think these are the 10 components she's talking about. You have the components and the measurable indicators over there, and I'm sure at some point we'll make the report, the document available. Yes, so this assessment was designed to balance human needs, economic demands, economic sustainability, and natural conditions. So for instance, the drinking water indicator, based on percentage of the population, using at least basic services, highlighted disparities. With Egypt experiencing a coverage of 99%, whereas a country like Central African Republic only had 37. The water quality indicator, measuring wastewater treatment, revealed that 67% of African countries do treat their wastewater, but only 5% of their wastewater is treated. And this, of course, underscores a critical gap. The physiography indicator unique in considering water adequacy, dependency, and variability, acknowledge the natural constraints some countries face. For example, Egypt, which depends on external water sources for 98% of its water supply. So despite its strength, the 2022 assessment highlighted a significant limitation: the reliance on infrastructure-focused data. And of course, this misses the lived experiences of communities grappling with water insecurity. This realization brings me to the heart of today's discussion, and that is integration of Y skills into our next assessment. The Y scale, developed by the distinguished Professor Sarah Young and colleagues, is a globally validated tool that captures household water insecurity through experiential metrics, such as worry about water availability, such as interruptions in water supply, and of course, compromises in daily activities due to water shortages. Unlike traditional indicators that merely measure physical access to resource availability, the Y scale amplifies the human voice, offering a nuanced understanding of how water insecurity impacts livelihoods, how it impacts health and well-being. Therefore, incorporating the Y scales into our upcoming assessment will address critical gaps in our current framework. For instance, while our drinking water indicator tracks access to basic services, it does not capture whether households feel secure in their water supply or face stress from unreliable sources of water. The Y Scales 12-item survey, which asks respondents about experiences like going to bed thirsty or skipping hygiene practices due to water scarcity, will complement our hygiene and health indicator by providing qualitative depth to quantitative metrics like diarrheal deaths. And by integrating Y scales data, we aim to create a composite indicator that blends experiential and infrastructural insights, offering a more holistic view of water security. However, how we would eventually do this remains to be seen, but we will try at least to make it work. Hopefully with all your help. This represents a huge opportunity for collaboration, plus the discussions that are slated to happen tomorrow. This integration aligns seamlessly with the symposium's theme. Experiential data, as captured by the Y scale, can inform technological innovations, such as designing water delivery systems that prioritize reliability and user trust. It can guide infrastructural investments by identifying communities where water security is most acutely felt, even if physical access appears adequate. At the transboundary level, Y-scale data can encourage dialogue among nations sharing water resources, like those in the Nile Basin, by highlighting shared human challenges that transcend borders. Moreover, this approach supports academic publications and planning for events such as the UNFCCC Climate COP that will be taking place this year in November, the Stockholm Water Week that takes place in August this year, as we refine methodologies to meet global water security goals. The broader implications of this shift are profound. By centering human experiences, we can better align water security interventions with SDG 6 targets, ensuring that solutions are not only technically sound, but also socially relevant. For example, in countries like Ethiopia, where only 17% of the population has access to limited sanitation services, Y-scale data could reveal whether cultural or behavioral factors exacerbate insecurity, and also help us guide targeted interventions. In data-scarce regions where traditional metrics are incomplete, experiential data can serve as a proxy, enabling assessments where none were previously possible. Now, in the middle of 2025, 5 years before the UN Agenda 2030 expires, the urgency to improve water security in Africa cannot be overstated. The 2022 assessment was a starting point, a call to action for better data, stronger governance, and equitable solutions. By incorporating the wide scale, our next assessment will not only quantify water security, but also humanize it, ensuring that the voices of Africa's communities shape the path forward. I'm committed to advancing this dialogue through engagements with regional bodies like the African Ministers' Council on Water, that is AMCOW, and global platforms like this symposium today. In closing, I extend my gratitude to Northwestern University's Center for Water Research, the Israel Innovation Project, and the Institute for Policy Research for convening this vital conversation today. Together, let us harness experiential data to build a future where water security is not just a metric, but a lived reality for all Africans. I thank you for listening to me. I hope I did justice.
You did wonderfully. Thank you so much. So this concludes the presentation part of the event, but we are not done yet. If I could ask the panelists to please come to the front. And there are 2 microphones that are available for panelists to respond to questions to. And I will be circulating with a microphone for the audience. I will take the privilege of kicking off the questions by directing the panelists' attention to thinking about transboundary water needs and what sorts of information might be useful, are needed, that you've used to sort of arbitrate as you think through transboundary water issues. So what's missing, what's needed, and what has worked in the past? Please, go ahead.
I think I need a microphone. I'm not sure.
How many professors does it take to turn on a microphone?
I have a loud voice. I think that it's very important to make a distinction when we talk about transboundary watersheds between countries that have acute or even moderate scarcity problems and those that do not. I can almost chart my own perception on this issue. You know, there's sort of a philosophical debate on natural resources in general, but also in water, between so-called cornucopians or Prometheans, people who are technologically optimistic. Prometheus was the Greek god who gave fire to humans. And they kind of think that water isn't a problem because we can create as much as we need now, very inexpensively, and that we shouldn't be concerned about it so much. And there's the opposing view, which is a Malthusian view, which says we don't have enough, the wars of the coming decades are going to be over water, et cetera. And living in a country like Israel means that I have gone from a situation where I felt that water was a scarcity crisis to one where I'm fairly complacent about it. Not terribly complacent, I'll explain why in a second. So I think it's when you talk about the perceptions of water, it really depends on which side you're coming from. Now, of course, when Israel did move over to desalination and started producing a surfeit of water, there was a certain kind of existential crisis amongst environmentalists because we've been preaching the gospel of sustainability for all these years and Spaceship Earth, and we have to have really concerned about the natural resources of the planet, and all of a sudden we understood that actually the oceans aren't going to go dry, we have as much water as we want. And that's a very different perspective, okay? So I can even see it in my own family. So I don't want to go on too long, I have a lot to say on this particular issue, but I would say that what does happen when you move over to a technologically dependent sources of water is, first of all, if you live in a turbulent region like we do, we have 5 major desalination plants. All we need is 1 or 2 bombs, and if you don't have bottled water in your house, you're in big trouble. And also, I would go to the issue, that photograph that you showed, I thought was very compelling, about a woman who lives right near a lake, and yet she doesn't really have access to it. And so that even in wealthy societies, there are always people who are vulnerable and often actually fall out of a system for a variety of reasons. So it's very hard in a region like we are, where there's some wealthier countries that have no trouble, like Saudi Arabia has all the desal they want, and we do. And other countries, say like Yemen, where there's tremendous water insecurity, and the perceptions are just completely different.
So the data that are needed, what would you say?
I think that you have to start by talking to people. It's not a surprise that David Katz's data has shown over a transition. We have a certain moral hazard now in Israel, so I think you want to start seeing what are the gaps between what is actually there and what people perceive they are, and what are the real insecurities.
Thank you. Is anyone else on the panel like to add to that? The question is, with transboundary issues, so what sorts of information are needed? What don't we have, and what do we have that has worked as we sort through these transboundary issues?
Thank you very much. Actually, the experiences with transboundary water, as has been experienced by Israel, is very complicated, because this leaves us for a very long distance. For example, in Kenya, we have many policies and regulations trying to govern at the dialect the way we behave, both on local and international waters. We have the Water Act that is being reviewed from now and then. We have the Irrigation Act that is being reviewed from now and then. We have Water Regulation Act, Water Services Regulation Act, and principally why these policies are not serving for a long term is because the data that was used to formulate them was not futuristic enough to be able to guide on the movement. So the experience that now is coming out is that the individual voice in dialecting or in having a feel on how the water as a resource should be managed is very critical. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr.
Thank you. I don't want to overdo it. I think my colleague and I come from both Kenya. But I will speak for the AU, which is the 54 African countries angle. And you cannot miss politics from water. You cannot miss that. And first of all, allow me to say thank you to the university for adding the African voice, because we are all brothers and sisters on this earth, and somehow it's good to bring that perspective on board. That said, when you speak of transboundary water, we have our fair share. From Okavango in the southern side of Africa to what I did with my thesis. And in fact, I was telling Professor Sarah that I lost my first interview job that I had when I left the US. Did my undergrad in University of Minnesota and my first master's, and then I went to Vermont Law School. Very happy to go home and trying to get my first job. And I'm just telling the Gen Zs who are here, who are going to graduate, the world is not easy, but you have so I had my first interview, and somebody asked me a very innocent question, and I did not want to lie about it, and I will never ask you to lie. He said, what was your dissertation? And you could read from my CV, my resume, that actually my CV, my dissertation was on equal distribution of the Nile water using John Rowell theory of justice. If you Google it right now, you can find it in the University of Minnesota library. So the guy happens to have been an Egyptian who asked me now, Mr. Ismail, and I happen to have an Egyptian name, by the way. My name is Ismail Fahmi. So he said, what was your conclusion? And I told him that redistribution. I lost my job right there. And the card that was waiting for me outside actually was that I was supposed to use. I did everything very well. But just because I answered the question the right way that I thought, and that is why transboundary is a very sensitive subject in different parts of the world. So I'm just sharing with you the Kenyan side. Because of the population boom, Egypt was rightly so quite very strategic in their times. And I went back into that subject. In 1800, the Egyptians used to go and bribe the Ethiopian kings with gold and all sorts of things, just because they were quite being strategic and way ahead of some of us. But now with the population boom, with the development agenda that we want to set, even up to today, if I meet with different people, depending on if I want to talk about the transboundary water issues, I have to use diplomatic language. Like I can talk about transboundary, but I will take water for economic use. Okay? So I think with the able leadership, the learning that you are doing in this institution, I'm just referring to the students, you will know how to maneuver that world. But the world is actually open, and I think once we agree, the resources are out there. If we all put our heads together, we should be able to utilize the same resources in a very useful way for the Mother Earth.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shai. So diplomacy on top of data is the message that I'm hearing. I think we had a question from the crowd from Professor Abigail Forstner from the Journalism School. Medill.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the members of our panel. What's going to be the impact of climate change on water stress? Climate change is going to make dry areas. It is making dry areas drier. It's stressing aquifers, contaminating them. What is the answer there?
Well, I'd never venture to answer that question fully, but I can tell you a little bit about how we're experiencing it in our projects with Helvetas, which was really interesting for Dr. Miller to, all of the data he showed was from a few of Helvetas programs, and I think actually a really vast areas that are dealing with climate change issues. So one of the areas that he presented was in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is considered, I don't know if it's one of the top 5, maybe one of the even higher top 2 or something of countries that will be affected by climate change. They have these big cyclones that come through. They're dealing with all of this salinization, all this water coming in through their groundwater sources, or sorry, through their surface water. So their surface water is unsafe because it's becoming more saline. And then they also have, as many of you probably know, have contaminated groundwater, arsenic. So they have this really, really double problem there. And so we're seeing the climate factors really show up in those cases and having to actually build interventions that speak to that. So for example, we use this like double platform well, where you use the bottom surface when there's no flooding, but when it's flooded, you actually have to boat in to go to the top platform. Like that's what we're talking about when we're talking about how to adapt to a lot of these situations. And I think this is also where the insecurity, where the water experience skills come in. So another data set that Dr. Miller presented was in Madagascar. And what he didn't show was that there was 2 very different regions that we did the program in. One is a very tropical region in the north. There's a lot of water there. And people don't actually feel very water insecure. That's what we found out there. But their water quality is actually way worse than another area that's drier. And so we found that some of these indicators that we currently use, the actual SDGs, the JMP, the Joint Monitoring Program indicators, only tell us like part of that story. They only tell us if people have water access right then, if it's safe, but we're seeing drastically different things as it relates to the experience of those people. And I think a lot of that is, again, related to climate. It's, do you have access to water readily available? Is that all year round? Is that affected by drought? Is that affected by flood? And we kind of are starting to tease a little bit more of that out using the experience skills.
To be clear, I'm not paying them to say, like, we use the water scales.
I would just say that climate change makes water scarcity problems much worse. Maybe the most famous example is what happened in Syria after 5 years of consecutive drought. Farmers were basically having to shut down. They moved to the city, found out that they were all Sunnis and the government was Alawite Muslim, and they became dissatisfied, turbulence. A lot of people make some sort of a connection between water scarcity / climate change induced drought and the horrible civil war in Syria and all the humanitarian. I would say in a much more clear example, 2 weeks ago, Israel had its largest forest fire in our history, 20,000 domains of lands. We had to shut down the entire center of the country. Independence Day celebrations were canceled. And that was because we had the driest winter in our country's history. And in a very, very unseasonable early fire in April, it just was nothing to it. So I think we're going to be seeing all kinds of examples of where water-induced climate crises or climate-induced water crises get worse.
A quick comment from Kenya and Engineer Thrita.
Thank you. Actually, in Kenya, the subject of water is a campaign tool for our politicians. Everybody who gets on top of them will talk about, I'll bring you water, this and this time. And it has been there since independence. And what that one shows is that there is a lot of dissatisfaction on matters water for the last 60 years that the country has been independent. And principally, if you go to region like the north, where even the commodity is not available, now the issue of quality does not matter. They just need whatever commodity to be able to get. So this subject of what are the experiences of each of us, wherever you live, whether you're in the city or in the rural area or from arid or semi-arid, is a conversation that should be carried actually a little bit higher level, so that now it is used to guide on policy formulation and financing of matters water. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from back here, Professor Omar Farr.
Can I just piggyback on that?
Please, yes.
So for climate change in Africa, I will say we are in between the pendulum of more water on one side and less water on the other side. So you can imagine if you get also more water, that means you're also getting flooding. So that is affecting the crop production and the whole 9 years that comes with it. So I was a CEO for 10 years in the water sector in Kenya, and one of the things that I came up with was a term that I called it climate-proofing infrastructure, both in urban and rural. So if we had a water pan that will last us for 6 weeks, I would suggest that that is too small and we should go big, because Kenya, for example, just to give you, as our country, we'll get our rainy season once in a while. Some parts of Kenya will get rain. The other parts, the northern side, which I come from, has issues, with rainfall. But if you climate-proof the infrastructure, depending on the size, and you play around with it, we should be able to overcome. But again, as I said, the whole of Africa, it's either one side is getting more water, which is also not good, and others are also water stressed. Okay.
So thank you to our panelists here. So far, what I'm hearing is we're talking about water quality. Are we next to a river or an ocean for desalination? Are any of the countries in the Middle East or Africa or even in the US looking into capturing water where we have the most of it from the atmosphere?
There's an Israeli startup that is starting to do this. I don't think it's been scaled, but I can say that in our department, the Social Sciences Department of Tel Aviv University, 100% of the water, if you take it from the water fountain, is collected from the atmosphere on the roof. So at the pilot scale, I think it's starting to happen. I haven't seen any studies about feasibility.
And that's at Tel Aviv University?
Tel Aviv University, which is not necessarily the gold standard. There are other universities that are maybe more advanced in water technologies, Ben Gurion and Technion. So yeah, but we're very much proud of that, and you're welcome to come and have atmospheric induced rain.
There's also some work being done by the U.S. military, actually, to supply armies in desert conditions.
I am part of it.
It's
called the MOVE program.
Yeah.
So that, Prof, allow me to add to this. I received a group from, I don't know where they were, but they really insisted and spoke with my president And they were actually sent back to me to my office. And they had actually done several piloting in Jordan. And they said, we do that.